Give people a minute to trickle in.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So are you officially a move now, Bob?
Yep. Got New Hampshire driver's license and everything.
Nice. We're just in time for the cold, but I guess Boston was probably pretty cold too. So
Yeah, but unlike there, you can't like walk to a restaurant or anything. Here, it's just there's an isolation factor that we have to solve.
Are you gonna get? Yeah, have to get supplies helicoptered in, type of thing.
not that bad, but.
All right, so a handful of people have joined, so I'll do a little intro and then we can get started.
Great.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Sophie and I'm one of the booksellers at Belmont Books. For those of you who don't know, Belmont Books is an independently and locally owned bookstore in the greater Boston area. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of events coming up. Tomorrow, we have a virtual event with Judy Bolton-Fassman as she discusses her new memoir, Asylum, A Memory of Family Secrets, with author Jessica Keener. And on Tuesday, the 26th at 6, we're doing an in-person offsite event with Jenna Bloom for the launch of her new memoir, Woodrow on the Beach. All of those events and more can be found at our website at belmontbooks.com. If you have any questions for the authors throughout the event, feel free to put them into the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your screen. Tonight, we are joined by Brant Cooper and Robert Buderi. Brant Cooper is the CEO and founder of Moves the Needle, a global consultancy specializing in innovation for Fortune 50 companies and entrepreneurs, and the New York Times bestselling author of The Lean Entrepreneur. With over 2 decades of expertise in helping companies bring innovative products to market, he blends agile design thinking and lean methodologies to ignite entrepreneurial action within large organizations. Brant is a sought-after keynote speaker, startup mentor, and trusted executive advisor. He speaks around the world on organizational agility, digital transformation, and how to refocus missions on creating value. Robert Buderi is an author, journalist, and entrepreneur. He founded the online business organization Xconomy, which was sold publicly traded British company Informa in 2016. Before launching Xconomy, Bob was a research fellow in MIT Center for International Studies. He previously served as editor-in-chief of MIT's Technology Review magazine and as Business Week's technology editor. Bob is the author of 5 books about technology and innovation, and his 5th book, a geobiography of Kendall Square called Where the Futures Converge, will be out in May 2022 from MIT Press. And with that, I will hand it over to you guys.
Wow.
Great. Thanks, Sophie. Really happy to be here to talk with Brant, who I've known for, I think, a decade now or so. When my company Xconomy expanded to San Diego, I got to know him. He's been a great friend. He's truly one of the visionaries, innovators, and mentors, not just locally, but nationally around innovation, startup success, and business success. And I think what is really special about him, and I hope we get to talk about it, it's not just about building businesses for profit and jobs and things like that. It's about building community and addressing through business some of the big societal challenges that we face. So that's part of what you talk about in Disruption Proof, and I hope we certainly get to that. But as
thanks, Bob.
As a kickoff question, one of the things that you make the case, I mean, there have been lots of business books about disruption over the years, but you make the case that there's something different and unique and fundamentally different about the disruption happening now. So maybe you set the stage with that and how you came to that conclusion, and then we'll talk about how you can be disruption proof.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that it came out of my working with these big companies for the last 10 years. And it's always been sort of a struggle. Innovation budgets, all of these innovation teams struggle, and even the teams that have budget can't really compete against a startup ecosystem where there's thousands of startups maybe trying to solve a particular problem. And so I wanted to, I was setting out a couple of years ago to write a book that that really brought sort of the mindset rather than the concept of innovation in response to disruption. Because what occurred to me inside these companies is that most of these companies don't really have a technology problem. They don't need to go and invent. And so I hate to say this to like a Boston crowd, but the Innovators Dilemma, I think, was maybe focused on a particular time in the Industrial Revolution where technology invention was at the fore, and so companies had to focus on how they were going to keep up with the pace of technology invention. And yet when I looked around, most of the startups weren't doing technology invention. If you look at the big startups over the last 10 years, there's really no technology invention there at all. Facebook, arguably even Google, Airbnb, Uber, there's no technology invention there. And so I actually started to marry this idea that innovation groups inside of these large companies that were struggling with sort of this classic story of how you deal with Innovators Dilemma, that maybe there's something that's changed here. And to be honest, Bob, COVID just drove this home. So, I write in the sort of the author's note at the beginning of the book that I didn't set out to write a pandemic book, but when you write a book during the pandemic, there's sort of no way it can't be.
Yeah.
But the fundamental idea there is that suddenly the core business, the execution side of the business, the operational excellence side of the business was stuck with a pandemic, with a disruption to their normal course of business, that all of the technology innovation, the innovation silos that they had established, their labs, none of them could solve this problem that was facing all of these businesses around the world. And that's that their current markets were stopped, were on pause, or were disrupted. And so to me, that really drove home this idea that everybody inside the company needs sort of that mindset. It's not that they apply it all the time, they apply it to different degrees, but everybody faces uncertainty that's brought on by this new complexity in the world that is causing what I think is going to be sort of these endless disruptions. And so it's really that mindset that we need to imbue throughout the company so that companies can become more resilient and able to respond to all of these challenges that are going on.
But you seem to think that although COVID augmented and magnified all these things, that this will somehow be faced with this greater disruption challenge post-COVID as well.
Right. So I think that the digital technology, the speed of information, the speed of disinformation, the interconnectedness of the world, the fact that we're all running around with computers in our pockets that are 10,000s of times more powerful than the first room-sized computers back in the 50s. It just means that there's a different structure to the economy, a different structure to the world. So I think things like ships stuck in canals that disrupt global supply chain, the hospital system here in San Diego, and I think in Massachusetts not that long ago, was attacked by ransomware that brought down that whole, sort of mini economy there. Energy grid collapses. I think that there's these things that used to be isolated are now rippling through economies and rippling through businesses so that we can be disrupted at any time. The normal course of our execution can be disrupted at any time. Plus the fact that the companies and institutions are managed and structured as an extension to these assembly lines where things were pretty well understood. If I could produce a microwave oven cheap enough for middle class to buy it, it was going to be successful. Today, It's like, what features do I need? What color should I have? Will I still be able to sell it even if I make it? And so instead of this centralized, yes, we can see what this is going to do, this information comes from the edge of the economy, from the edge of the businesses. And it's the power of the decision maker, the consumer. It's changing demographics that happen means that your buyers may be changing. It's these external disruptions. I think that we flipped the pyramid. the information now lives on the edge of the business, the edge of the economy. And so internal focused hierarchical command and control, one-way communication down is exactly opposite to what is required, I think.
That's really, really interesting. Now, there's a piece of me when I hear you talk, I think, holy crud, like this is impossible. But how can anybody get through this? But I actually, you have some ideas. And so how do you make an organization or a business disruption proof? And then it's not just a matter of protecting, it's about also doing it in a way that you create new opportunities, I assume.
Right. So I think that it's not a coincidence that the technology that sort of causes the problem also helps solve the problem. And so I think that a lot of the practices that we see in especially digital businesses or digital areas of traditional businesses already have a lot of the right behaviors. In my view, we just have to extend them throughout the business, even into back office functions. But things like understanding customers, talking to customers, running experiments to try to figure out what works, rather than, sort of I'm a leader, therefore I'm supposed to know. It's I'm a leader, and so I need you to actually go figure out what's the right way to solve the problem. So practices like design thinking, Eric Ries's lean startup, agile methodologies, all of these things are really geared towards decentralizing decision-making, pushing the problem and solution exploration out to the edges of your company so that you can actually get to the right solution. And so I think that the practices are already there. The difference is, instead of creating a silo that have those, which is your innovation silo or your digital transformation silo, it's bringing those actually into the core part of the business. It's bringing it into the back office functions, as well as to the business units that, sort of are hoping they can continue to execute like they always had. But what they really need to do is get some of that mentality where they can go and figure out how to deal with the uncertainty that they face.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. But at one level, these are great things to say you're going to do as a company. But how do you actually set in practice the systems, the methods, the things that can enable people to actually do this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think leadership knows. I think boards know. I think that they know that they're living in this different world, and the struggle really is, how do we actually, like you say, it's really how do you implement such change? And unfortunately, I think we tend to do it the same way as that structure that I was talking about. It's sort of this top-down, often consultant-led, sort of pushing it down the stack. We are going to do it this different way. And what happens is, like, if you look at the agile transformations as an example, what often happens is that the implementation details are passed on to people that don't really understand the principles of agile. They don't understand the empowerment part. They're given to people that are given their marching orders, and so they go and implement it. And what you get are a lot of agile structure, a lot of agile functions without the principles that are really driving the change that we want to see. And so my idea for kickstarting, and I act like it's my original idea, I'm sure that the ideas, there's companies all over that are doing this sort of thing, is that you sort of kickstart the change by running events or leaders empowering teams to go solve problems that are more near-term problems. So rather than thinking about innovation as, I got to, reinvent banking, you're thinking about, well, how do I get the design team to work differently with the manufacturing floor? Or how can we get, these particular processes to be more efficient? Or how do we update even, sales scripts? Or how do we take this existing product and let's just run some experiments in this market over here? So what we're trying to do is get people the behavior change at the grassroots level, get them to start learning and practicing those behaviors, while at the same time you're giving leadership this ability these new skills to evaluate those projects differently. So rather than what's my return on investment and when are you going to get done and when are we going to see all of the returns, it's acting more like the startup world, which is, well, how many customers have you been talking to? What do they have to say? You know, what's the feedback that we're getting? What are the experiments that you've run? What is the engagement that you're seeing from this particular market segment? And so, or internal stakeholders. And so the idea is to practice the behaviors in order to demonstrate, which I believe wholeheartedly is true, that a lot of these skills already exist in these companies.
Yeah.
And that you can drive near-term impact, that it's not, we have to wait 5 years. We actually can see process improvement, back-end improvement, you know, marketing and sales improvement in a very short period of time. And so that's how you create this momentum where people start to trust that they can actually empower these teams to go and solve even bigger problems.
And have you seen some examples of this, some companies really doing this well?
It's interesting to me. Like, to me, one of the companies that have done this right for ages is Intuit. And it's interesting to me because they were one of the first companies that really combined design thinking and lean startup and agile practices. And so that doesn't mean everybody's doing all of that, but you're trying to find what is that right combination that works for your culture and your business. And what's interesting to me is that other companies then go see that and they copy it, but they copy it in a way that's like, oh yeah, here's the lab that we set up in Silicon Valley and they're going to behave that way. Even though Intuit, this is a practice that's throughout the company. I mean, you know, former CEO Brad Smith is telling me, he's like, all executives had to do follow me homes, and follow me homes was actually founder Scott Cook was like, this is what he did when he first started his business, is he would watch people use the product. I mean, this is such a, we want to overcomplicate this, Bob. I mean, this is, if all executives inside their companies watched consumers interact with their products, the amount of learning there would be amazing. And that's not wasteful. That's not taking away from execution mode. That's actually going to make your execution more efficient, understanding those things. So I think Intuit is great at it. I think that there's pockets in a bunch of other organizations that are doing, especially that kickstart part of it. You know, Adobe's got their red box, and a bunch of other companies have sort of copied that model or even using that. Adobe outsource or open source that. Swisscom is one, Nestle is another. The big, you know, pharmaceutical buyer had a very distributed program called the Catalyst Fund, where individuals could look at their regions and go like, we think this would be a good market test. And then that team would be, if they were chosen, would be empowered to go and figure it out, do the empathy work and the run experiments. ING, I guess, is another company that stands out that has really implemented that, you know, sort of the innovation is everybody's job type. They've got they call their combination of design thinking and agile and lean startup PACE, their PACE program. And they've got PACE every day. So this is how you apply PACE to everyday issues that you're solving, as well as PACE for, you know, the Horizon 2s that are 2 or 3 years down the road, and PACE for reinventing banking. So a number of organizations that have gone pretty far.
That's really, really interesting. You know, one of the things that you talked about empowerment, and it actually, in my first book, it was about a secret lab at MIT during World War II, and they brought in all these super talented young physicists because they were like 21, 22, but because they had no other choice, they gave them all this authority that they never would have gotten normally. And when I went into business, I actually tried to borrow some of that, like have a young person, a talented young person, let them have some authority. And if they make a mistake, that's okay, because you can't look over their shoulder. But by giving people more authority than they're supposed to have, you actually strengthen your. And it just reminded me of some of the message that you're imparting.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's exactly great. I think that there are people eager to work that way. So you don't even have to just go for young people these days. I mean, it's really, it's sort of to me, this is why I try to make the case that about the change, about the societal changes, and how fast everything is moving. And so if people buy into the fact that, we can't sit back and wait for decisions, that we're too slow and we're not agile, we're not able to respond, then maybe people will be inspired to make that change, which is really just emboldening your team. We hire smart people, give them a problem, and then give them the authority to go and solve that problem. I think that the biggest gap there is sort of that trust, where the manager or the leader is not confident yet that the team is going to be able to pull that off. And so I think that that's really kind of the gap there. And so start small. What is something that's keeping you up at night? Okay, I'm going to give this project to my team, and I'm going to step back and I'm going to let them solve the problem. And they're going to give me feedback about the progress that they're making. And if there are obstacles that they run into, then I'm going to help them overcome the obstacles. But they're self-organized, they're autonomous, they've got the resources they need, the authority, the metrics on how we're going to measure their progress. And I just need to step back and support their efforts rather than, like you say, sort of managing it.
That's really it. So in the book, how do you like dive down a little deeper on how you recommend organizations start doing this? You have some, like, you have a concept, RAD, for instance, at
right. Well, so RAD is kind of this SoCal version of the mindset that we're hoping to build here. So RAD stands for resilient, aware, and dynamic. And so the idea is that you build an organization itself that it's not like I'm trying to get completely rid of command and control or rid of execution mode. It's like a palm tree is a very strong tree, right? It's got strength within it, but it's also flexible and it bends in the storm.
Oh, good.
And the awareness is that's it's empathy. It's empathy for your people inside your company. How are they feeling? Like, all of these companies struggling with remote or in office. And yet I see like very little empathy work being done to understand what are the implications of your policy. Empathy doesn't mean doing what the people need or doing what they say, but you need to understand what the implications are. And even that understanding would maybe mean not everybody would leave your organization, right? But it's also awareness of things that are going on in the economy and globally. And maybe even being a couple of the case studies in the book are organizations that saw, perhaps the implication of COVID earlier than others and actually started making changes sooner than others. And so the final, the D is dynamic. So, if you could take in all this information, but you couldn't do anything about it, then that wouldn't be very valuable. So the dynamic part is actually being able to apply what you've learned quickly so that you can change course. And so there's a lot of agile practices, the idea of sprints. And again, it's a software development principles originally, but it can be applied to everybody else. And no, everybody doesn't have to do 1 week or 2 week sprints. But to me, it's this idea of building into your processes, the idea of stopping, pausing, looking around, taking in new information, and then going, okay, well, this is what we're working on. Should we change it based upon this new information? And
so explain a little bit about, is this what a sprint is? Maybe the audience doesn't know what.
Right. So originally, one of the implementations of the principles of Agile, which is available at agilemanifesto.org, by the way, is that you wanted to always build into the processes the idea of continuous improvement, as well as checking in with stakeholders that you are actually building the right thing. Okay. And so a sprint in Agile terminology is usually 1 week or 2 weeks. We're going to take the work that we've done. Let me first say is like, we're going to decide together as a team, what are we going to do in the next 2 weeks? And then at the end of those 2 weeks, you're going to take what you've written, the code that you've written, and you're going to go to your stakeholders, customers, or perhaps internal stakeholders, and check in with them. Am I on the right path? And then you're also, as a team, going to do a retrospective and say, okay, how can we improve the way we're working together? And so that's every 2 weeks. And for a lot of companies and a lot of teams inside of companies, that's maybe way too often. But the idea is right. We're working on projects. We should pause, take a look around, check in with our stakeholders. Is there anything that we should change course, or we're going to put our heads down and we're going to go and do another 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month or whatever? And so those are some practices of Agile without doing some sort of rigid implementation of Scrum or SAFe or whatever. It's taking some of those ideas of how to get to the principles and applying them really throughout the company, in my opinion. And let me say one other thing, Bob. I think that for companies that are doing remote plus in office or just remote, I think this is more important than ever, because I think that putting people on teams, regardless of whether their function demands that they're on a team, creates a social structure that is going to be really important going forward. I think that people miss the social structure by not going into the office. And so you can sort of create it, by putting people on teams, and you have the team members that are holding each other accountable to accomplishing their mission. And it means that that's going to build trust, I believe, with the leaders. They don't have to be micromanaging all of those remote people. And that's what's making them uncomfortable with the idea of remote. And if the team is actually proactively reporting to you progress that's being made on a mission, then that leader actually suddenly has the ability to become more strategic and a little bit more proactive than maybe they were even in the office environment.
Very interesting. Yeah, I just want to remind people, type in your questions in the Q&A. We can take them as we go. I have others for Brant as well. Brant, now the book was written, I think, mainly for larger companies, but it has a lot of principles and you spend a lot of time with startups as well. So what would and I think that in the Boston area, the people listening in might be at startups. And so what would you say to them about this?
Well, so I think a lot of the natural way that startups work, at least in the early stages, the idea of, people having to wear multiple hats, teams tend to be a little bit more cross-functional or interdisciplinary. The focus typically is on, driving impact for the business. So you have to get the business moving forward every day. And so it's less on, did you do, these 100 tasks that you're signed up for? And as opposed to like, well, how did you move the business forward? So I think that mentality is a startup mentality. And I guess what my message there is that they need to maintain it, because I think that a lot of startups get advice from, well-meaning, but from advice from, advisors and investors and people that actually tend to come from big businesses and assume that when a business starts to scale, they need to start looking like a larger organization. And I guess I don't think that that's true anymore. I think that they need to be willing to organize their companies differently. And there's a number of companies that are doing this. Spotify is a great example. You structure the company based upon what works best for your culture to continue to drive impact. And so all businesses have to learn how to balance the execution stuff, the stuff that you have to get done, with the exploration stuff, which is the learning side of it that eventually makes your execution more efficient. So everybody has to balance that. And so I think that as a company is growing, scaling, they need to think of that balance and structure appropriately in order to maintain that sort of that culture that got them going. And so I think that's actually kind of different. I think that, I'm a big fan of Steve Blank, but his fourth step of the epiphany was essentially now go create a big business. And I don't think it's true anymore.
Interesting. Very interesting. I also think startups, although it's true, they're scrambling, they've got multi hats, they do all these things, but sometimes they have this idea and they're just too wedded to that idea that they've started this company around, and they can't stop and listen.
Well, that's true. I mean, that's the exact same problem that big companies have, right? So I think that that's just where waste comes from, building products that nobody wants. And so they're I can't make you disruption proof if you build products that nobody wants. I think it really gets back to, you have to go and understand your customers, and you have to run experiments to cut through your assumptions, and you have to look at the data, look at the evidence in order to cut through your biases, or you're really, I think you're going to struggle.
Well, now let's get a little heavier here, because one of the things that's happened with a lot of successful companies, they've grown into monsters. They're making billions of dollars for their CEOs and stuff, and their investors, but it's not really getting down. And we've seen this whole widening chasm between the haves and have-nots and the super rich. And I think that's one of the things that you address a little of that. Like, companies can be the lead the way on some of these fronts. It's not just about making your profits and maybe creating a bunch of jobs.
Yeah, I think that there's a mindset there, right? I think that if you have a mission in your business, and I'm not talking about a social mission. I mean, if you're Uber, your mission is to provide this transportation, right? Well, and food too with Uber Eats, but if we concentrate on just the food part of it. And so, the Uber's vehicles are not going to start, flipping hamburgers if they figure out that flipping hamburgers is actually going to return a higher profit to shareholders. They're going to maintain what their core mission is. And so if we think about optimizing the financial efficiency to accomplishing your mission, if we just add those words at the end, it actually changes the equation a little bit. So I'm not sure where we lost that exactly in capitalism, but we go into business. Many people go into business because there's a problem to be solved. And if we focus on solving the problem, we're creating value in the world, and you're successful, all of these riches come back to you, and they come back to the shareholders. But if we concentrate only on the wealth part of it, then that only goes to a few. It goes to the founders and the early investors, not necessarily even the retail investors, and the day traders that understand how to speculate on the stock market. I mean, so that just seems silly to me. So I think that we need to get back to the winning part of capitalism, which is solving problems and creating value in the world. Now, my view on that is that corporations are going to do whatever they get away with. So I think that there's a role for policy and for government to create the proper incentives that it gets corporations to behave in the way that benefits society. So, Bob, we tend to focus on the outcomes. And so the problem with focusing on the outcomes is that it feels like a zero-sum game. It feels like it's a robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? I mean, it's the big redistribution argument. But capitalism is a game like any others, right? And so the rules of the game will actually change what the outcome is. When they change the rules in football, scoring went from the low 20s to the high 50s, right? And so this is no different. We have to enforce the rule. To me, if government simply was in charge of increasing competition, a lot of the problems start to go away. If companies are forced to compete based upon creating value, then they're not necessarily just looking for the cheapest materials. They're not just looking for cheap labor. They're not necessarily offshoring. And they will look at things like supply chain redundancy or fail-safe, failovers, because the idea is that you're supposed to be continuously creating this value, not just maximizing the profit. And so I think there's a system level changes that we need to make. And it's really an enforcement of existing laws, to be honest, that will actually start to write that equation and get capitalists to compete on creating value. And I think that that's how we have a strong middle class, and it's how we raise the standard of living. And I think it creates a more virtuous cycle in the world.
I think, anybody, first of all, get the book. And when I started reading even the intro, you address somehow in this simple intro, you address the very complicated nature of our society, and you pay homage to, you know,
Adam
companies are going to
Smith and
compete. They're going to do what they do. We have to live with that. You can't make everybody do, just the right thing. And there's a role for government, for leadership, for all these different things. And it's really thoughtful, which is unusual.
well, thanks, Bob, and I appreciate that. I mean, I think that when I was writing the book, I sort of felt that too, because there's a lot of vilification of companies, and there's a lot of vilification of CEOs and C-suites on one side, and young people just saying like, oh, it's the end of capitalism and all this. And I'm all like, yeah, I get you, but I also, I've seen the other side, and it's it's not very good. And yet the problems, the inequality, the inequity is also super obvious. And so I think that we can move beyond that. In some ways, to me, it seems so simple that people are going to call me naive. But I mean, I think that there's some changes that we can make, that it just writes the course and things start to improve. Again, I think you can get caught into this vicious, dog eat dog cycle, or you can get into a virtuous cycle where, hey, we're still benefiting from creating value in the world. And boy, isn't this fun. I mean, just a vast majority of the people that I've worked with inside of these large companies want to live meaningful lives. They want to contribute to the company, and they want to contribute to society. And so I think that we can empower people to do that.
We have our first question, so let me share it with the audience. Would you add your thoughts on what emerging opportunities you might see in connecting people?
Like connecting, can you maybe write a little bit more? Connecting people in what way? Like within a community, or just connecting communities?
Okay, we'll wait for that.
I think that there's a lot of interesting technology going on trying to connect people. Who knows? Maybe Facebook's new brand will be all about connecting people. I'm joking. Discord tries to connect people. I actually think it's difficult, but I think that there's a lot of the benefits of social media is about connecting people.
Here we go. How about for innovation that emerges from the way people connect together? So you talked a little bit about
yeah. So I think that I don't know what's out there now, but there's a lot of activity, sort of on the gig economy front, and with freelancers, and that, to me, that's sort of a part of an interesting discussion that, empowering workers is another way to sort of a systemic change that we can make that results in better outcomes. And yet even the people that are there trying to improve things for workers often lessen their power as opposed to increase their power, which is kind of interesting to me. And so I think that I would look at entrepreneur communities, and there's a lot of those, and I would look at freelancer communities. But like from the technical perspective, that's really interesting. I don't really know what's out there. But I think one of the really cool things, and Bob, you maybe have run into this, the idea that diversity, and I include in that interdisciplinary diversity, solves complex problems better than sort of this more homogeneous community. And so there's these great examples of chemists solving problems that the physicists could not figure out, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is what you're getting at, Bruce, but having a community where even just sort of technically minded people, the interdisciplinary nature of those type of people interacting around solving problems and innovation would be really cool. And I have no idea if something like that exists. Are you a startup entrepreneur, Bruce? Maybe this is an idea you can run with.
I know Bruce, he's a great guy and great thinker. While he may follow up, but you talked about something. You talked about businesses and leaders actually being open and wanting to do more than just make money and to help society and all these things. And that, I think, is a really important point. I don't know that, I know for myself, especially coming from a journalist background, I kind of tended to not trust customers. I would think they always wanted to kind of rip me off or something, businesses. But that actually, when you start embracing them, there's a few that will do that, but most people want to be fair. They want to have fair deals. They want to help you succeed and them succeed. All these kinds of things, and society. And so anyway, let's see. Bruce has said yes, and several interested around Cambridge plus Boston community. Thanks for the discussion. Yeah. So.
Yeah, very cool. No, I agree with
Yeah.
you. I agree with you, Bob. I mean, I think it's maybe healthier for me to be an optimist, but I do think that I don't know, one of the lines in the book that I like, and I don't know, maybe people won't even agree to it, but I say that kids set up lemonade stands is why our society is capitalist. They don't set up lemonade stands because we're capitalist. Right. I mean, it's just sort of it's a natural thing for people to do. And so I think that there's a core part of us as human beings that do that. And the kids that set up the lemonade stand, they need to serve good lemonade. They need to quench my thirst, but I also hope they make money. And so that's like, there's a beauty to that simple equation. Yeah. When I was talking to my colleague Jonas Koffler about this, he like brought up an example in Cuba that I ended up putting in the book, where Cuba is like evil communist, but if you go into Cuba, like the most popular places there are privately owned restaurants. Why? Because it's capitalism is a natural way of being. And so I think that there's a lot of power in that, and yet. I also think it's the responsibility of those of us that can do something about it, that we create a system that the output is more equitable, because that's actually what's going to make it last. And I've seen a couple of people comment now, and again, I make this comment in the book, that if you allow corporations to consolidate and then rule a market, you're not really that different than, the Soviet nomenclatura, when the government, hands all of a market to, one of their industries and they dominate there, right? I mean, there's no reason to be responsive to customers at that point. And so competition is just to me, it's the bread and butter of capitalism. And so we've kind of gone down this path where we've used these different ways of measuring, whether something is inefficient or whatever. And I think that if we just went back to like increasing competition, a lot of the problems start to resolve themselves.
With a little bit of oversight too.
Yeah, you have to have the oversight. You have to.
Yeah, you really do. So as we come in, and please others, type in your questions, but what would be, let me ask a kind of a negative kind of way of looking at things. What's the most common mistake you think organizations make that stops them from being disruption proof?
Yeah, I think that, I think it's as I mentioned earlier, I think it's this focus on financial efficiency without looking at the value that they're creating. So if you just look at financial efficiency, then you're going to go cheaper labor, cheaper materials, offshore your manufacturing, all of those things that we're now looking at in our economy and going like, wow, this is like causing lots of problems. And so that's number one. I think that we overuse the word innovation without defining it. And so what that means is the technology, people think it's about invention, and the core business goes, oh, well, innovation's not my job. And so it's, I don't know, it's kind of silliness getting down to semantics perhaps, but I think that it causes the problem. And so I think that, the innovation industry has this idea that you divide up your company, 95% is focused on execution mode and 5% can go off and do innovation. And there's no evidence that works. It doesn't work. In fact, there's no way that you spin up a few teams in an innovation lab that they're going to be able to compete with an innovation ecosystem like the startup scene. Right. Just no way. and it absolves the responsibility of the core business units from ever having to do this explore mode. But the core business are the ones that know what their customers need. They're the ones that are interacting with their customers all the time. They understand their products. And so maybe you just have to build into the processes this idea of a little bit of exploration every week or a little bit of exploration every month. And you build that into what it means to be a core, business unit execution mode. And so let's do a customer day, or let's do a rapid experiment day, or let's do this. I talk about in the book, these impackathons, which are 2-day events that are like hackathons, but you're actually exploring solutions instead of building them. You just start building in that exploration mode. And when Intuit did that, within the first 100 days, they had actually generated what they estimated to be $10 million worth of benefit. Now, wow. It's not huge compared to their billions of dollars, but the ROI is nearly infinite because it didn't cost them anything.
Yeah.
And then that 10 million had grown to 100 million in a decade. And so, that's just one example. So I think that the biggest problem practically that organizations face is they think that exploration is going to take away from their execution, when in my view, the exploration is going to make their execution more efficient. And so that's why you build it in.
This may be going too far, reading too much into it, but when you talk about how a lot of companies can just go for cheapest labor, it made me think of some of the things I've seen during COVID with smaller companies. Could be a little store, could be a restaurant. Everybody's having this labor crunch. People, even when they can come back for a job, they often don't want to. But yet some of these businesses don't have that problem. There's a scattered here. They've got plenty of employees while their neighbor doesn't. So it made me wonder if they've built this culture, built this in their own way, a disruption-proof culture.
See, I think that's exactly right, Bob. I think that's a great observation. I think it comes down to, again, it sort of gets that, maybe empathy is very quickly going to become an overused buzzword again. But if you understand your employees and you understand your customers, you're way more intelligent when you're designing your solutions. Again, it's not doing what they say. It's understanding what the implications are of what you're doing. And you can obviously do what they say as well if you think that's the right way, or you run an experiment and it proves to be the right way. And what's interesting to me is that the empathy actually flows both ways. So I teach a lot of people to go develop empathy for your leadership. Like, why are they not giving you budget? What's keeping them up at night? What is their decision-making process? Where's their background? The more you understand from them, the more you'll able to do what you need to do in order to convince them. And instead, it's, people are just kind of like, leaders aren't bought in. And I'm all like, I think they're bought in. I think they're just not buying into what you're selling them. So it's like.
Very good point. Well, what would be, as we come down, what would be like, if an organization wanted to get going, besides, what would be like, what's the first kind of few things they might do to kind of set them on the right path?
Yeah, so I think that from my view, it sort of depends on the level that you're at. If you're sort of on, at the ground level, my biggest recommendation is to go find like-minded people. And so you can spearhead perhaps innovation mindset or entrepreneur day or a happy hour where you talk about these type of things and invite people that do agile and human-centered design and maybe entrepreneurial people and just do a get together on a regular basis. And eventually you're going to get leaders there, and maybe somebody's got budget. And what your idea is that you get to the point that you get to form a team that runs experiments. And so that's a great way to get started. If you're a leader and you have a team, or you have a bunch of individuals that you could form sort of an ad hoc team around a particular challenge, do what I suggested earlier. Find a near impact issue that you would like to have resolved, frame it as this challenge, as their mission, and give it to that team. Give them the authority to go solve that problem, with the idea that what they need to do is go develop empathy for the stakeholders for whatever that challenge is, run experiments to try to figure out, what's the right solution. So ideate and all that, brainstorm your solutions, but then try them out in a rigorous way. There's some great books out there around running experiments, and then come back together as a team and use some of those agile principles to how can we improve, and what are we making progress on our metrics, and where should we focus next based upon the results of our experiments. And so it's a fun way to work. You get to exercise your intelligence and your creativity, and the leader gets to hopefully see that their team actually has this ability. And again, to me, those are small steps that people can take in their organization that actually starts to drive impact. And the moment you have impact, you now have evidence to go try pitching that to somebody else. You're not just pitching an idea, you're pitching to people, hey, this is what we did, and this worked really well. Do you have any challenges that you would like us to go and try to change as well? So I there's a lot of companies that have formalized that process, which I think is a great program to get going. But I think the first step is just to do that on a small scale and demonstrate some evidence that you can do it and that it has impact, and that, that'll start creating its own momentum.
That's fantastic. I hope a lot of people listen and do that. So do we have any other questions? It'd be great to have a few more questions, folks. Type them in. You've got this great opportunity to ask things that I haven't thought of.
Yeah, happy to help out. So I can mention that well, I'll just remind people that, please support your local bookstore and buy your books through Belmont Books. That was kind enough to host this. I have a conference coming up where I've brought together a really diverse group to talk about some of the larger changes and issues going on here. I think, one of the things that is interesting to me is not just about business, it's about government, and it's about education and nonprofits and investment. And so a super interesting group. So that's November 4th. I just always getting the dates wrong. And it's free. You can buy a book there, but it's free. So you're buying your book through Belmont Books. So come to the summit. And I've got some really interesting, there's a woman from the city of Hayward that applied a lot of these principles. So this is a government example, and it's absolutely extraordinary. And then there's a woman that leads, Lydia Dobbins, that runs the New Tech Network.org, is a nonprofit where she has a particular version of project-based curriculum for schools. So K through 6, middle and high schools. And what it is I call it agile. She probably doesn't want me to use that word, but it's like teaching agile to students. And this is like so extraordinary that the way these kids are learning is by forming teams and self-organized, and they get to figure out how they're going to solve a particular problem. And they're learning all of the things that they need to learn as they work this way. And it's really amazing because, and again, I just, I don't believe in fate, but I don't think it's by accident that we have schools that are learning to do this in preparing those students to live in this digital world where that's the required way to work. When we were in the industrial age, we literally taught kids how to work into factories. Yeah. And now we're teaching kids how to be agile and how to exercise their intelligence and their creativity to solve problems. And it's a beautiful thing.
That's fantastic. Well, to me, that seems like a great note to close, unless there's more questions. I don't know, Sophie, if there's anything else for you to say?
No, I think that also seems like a great place to wrap up. Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. That was really great.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for, please do go to Belmont Books. You're open physically, I take it?
We are, yeah.
Excellent, okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
yeah,
Brant.
Bob, thank you so much too for hosting. That was so fun to talk to you.
Same here, take care.
Okay, bye everyone.
Okay.